Welcome to the Spark seminar. Spark seminar is a set of presentations on topics related to medical imaging and artificial intelligence, organized by the Duke Spark initiative. We welcome today Dr. Stephen Aylward. He is the Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives at Kitware. Dr. Aylward has shown throughout his career a commitment to development and dissemination of open source software. And today he will present on MONAI, which is making increasing impact on medical imaging and AI. So, Stephen, please take it away.
All right. Thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity to present. Yeah, I have been passionate about open source for quite some time, and today I get to talk about that passion, so I welcome the opportunity. And in particular, what I'm going to be talking about is a little bit broader topic, open science, and how open science is really impacting, benefiting, accelerating the application of artificial intelligence in medical imaging. And so, jumping right in, work with me on this. This is you. So whether you're a professor at a university, head of a research lab, working in industry, leading a group there, just trust me, this is you, all right? And these are your coworkers. These are your fellow employees. These are the employees who work for you within that research lab in academia or industry. They're your students, whatever. And among your employees, there's Bob. And Bob just absolutely excels at everything, right? So his publications always get accepted. He's always on time with his reports. He keeps the infrastructure going. He's an outstanding programmer, just all around. Bob is your anchor man of your team. And then one day, tragedy strikes. Bob graduates. And then inevitably you hear the chorus of, I can't find Bob's code. Bob's code won't compile for me. I can't replicate Bob's results, or the dreaded, I emailed Bob a question, but he hasn't responded. All right. And so this is something that's going to happen in academia. It's happened to me in academia, in industry, throughout. Your key employee leaves, your key graduate student, postdoc graduates, moves on to their next job, and your lab really can take a setback if not planned well. So what is that planning that you need to do? What is that can overcome these challenges? It's open science. And so open science is kind of a three-legged stool. One of the legs is open source code, writing open source code. Then it's sharing your data and sharing your publications. And what this is all done is in this broader context of making certain that your code, your data, and publications work together so that the people others can replicate your results. All right, so it's reproducible science at its core. That's what open science is. And it's really a basic tenet of science overall. And if you don't do this, you don't just have to worry about people leaving your lab and a setback for your lab and lost code and so forth, but it really can have detrimental results. And so two heads of research labs, one in academia and industry, got together and they did a study that was published in Nature back in 2012. And this has been replicated. I need to update this slide with a more current reference because it happens time and again. And what these two labs and their whole teams, they got together and they identified 53 landmark publications. And this is in radiation oncology. And these are the publications that were driving the treatment of patients. So they were driving the standard of care, these publications. They were the landmark publications within that field. And what they wanted to do was to build upon these findings. They wanted to really extend that work to find out what the next level of radiation oncology care was going to be for cancer patients. And despite their efforts, years-long effort, they were not able to replicate 47 of the 53 results. Now, there's nothing that was malicious going on by these authors. You know, that's not what I'm claiming. There was no one, falsifying reports or anything along those lines. It's just there wasn't sufficient detail within those papers alone in order to replicate the results that were being presented within those papers. And, you know, this is not surprising when you really think about it. The paper is such a limited presentation of a body of research. So open science is really hard to do. And beyond getting that publication right, It's augmented if you can release the code and the analyses and so forth. But then there's also releasing the data, and then there's IRB concerns with regard to releasing the data, so forth and so on. So there's a lot of challenges with open source. I'm not saying that this is hard, that this is easy, okay? I'm saying that it's hard, or at least harder than not doing it in the short term. But in the long term, what you're going to see, and because of the wealth of tools that are out there, as you adopt those tools in your lab that support open science, you're going to see it becomes easier and easier, and the benefits greatly outweigh the cost. And so let's say you're an academia and you want to get tenure, all right? You want to get funding. We just heard about someone winning an R01. And that's a key step in that process. Well, writing in your NIH grant proposal that you're going to release all your code open source, and that you've been doing this for many years, and you've got this many users of your code, and it's had this impact on the field. NIH reviewers and administrators are going to love that. You're going to get your grant. We have an R01 on supporting VTK Visualization Toolkit, one of the open source tools at Kitware, and it's $3.4 million R01. And so any academic would love to have that in their list of grant funding. Additionally, another thing that we like having is impact. And I've mentioned that a couple of times already. That's what motivates a lot of us. It's not the money, maybe not even tenure, but it's really having that impact on the field, seeing our work do good. Well, that impact can be measured in terms of downloads per month. And if you look at some of the tools that came out of Kitware, we have 150,000 downloads per month. It's being used in ways that we absolutely never imagined. All right, and so it's benefiting healthcare, it's benefiting patients worldwide in ways we never thought possible. And that if we had kept it closed source, we would have never been able to do ourselves. And this impact results in citations of our work. So there's studies that have shown, not just for us, but in general, if you release the code and data associated with a paper, that paper is going to be cited significantly more. And so the two foundational publications that went with VTK, the Visualization Toolkit, they now have 13,000 citations between them combined. I mean, any academic would love to have that on their CV, all right? That bump up your H factor pretty well. And so it's really this impact, the citations and the funding all brought together that results from releasing your software open source, open data, open publications that make the benefits outweigh the cost. And this is true also in industry. So in industry, if you're doing a startup, you don't want to start coding from scratch, all right? The basics. You want to go ahead, grab that from a library that already exists, that's been thoroughly developed, tested, used in hundreds of different ways. And by building upon that, it saves your development costs and reduces your risk. So I'm going to argue that the reason why deep learning is succeeding is not only because of its performance, but also because it has done a phenomenal job, particularly in the medical imaging field, in embracing open science. And so looking at this, what do I mean by deep learning success in terms of performance? Well, that's left as an exercise to the audience, all right? You can't pick up a publication nowadays from the New York Times to technical journals that artificial intelligence isn't being talked about and being applied in some new and unique way. And hopefully today I'm going to teach about MONAI, which will give you the tools to do even more of that, all right? And so it's really, don't have to go into a lot of detail here, and it's just everywhere. But part of it being everywhere, part of this impact is really due to the fact that it has fully embraced open science. All right, so deep learning and open science are going hand in hand. And so in terms of access to publication, there's arXiv. And arXiv is the repository, public repository that's out there that people go ahead and before their article ever appears in a journal or even in conference publications, they're putting in an arXiv. It's a massive collection of really outstanding publications where the leading publications within the field, they've appeared on arXiv first. And then there's open access to data. At NIH, the Cancer Imaging Archive and the new and upcoming Imaging Data Commons, they're phenomenal collections, repositories for clinical data that you can use in order to develop your deep learning system. Then there's other things like ImageNet, as well as standards for those images and data in general, DICOM, FIRE, and so forth. And then there's open access algorithms. There's that open source code. PyTorch, you might have read in the news just 2 weeks ago, was released into a new foundation, open access, open source foundation associated with the Apache and Linux Foundation. And then there's MONAI, which is the topic of today. So what is MONAI? Well, MONAI is software at its heart, no question, but it also addresses data and then community building. So its goal was to accelerate the pace of research and development by providing a common software foundation and a vibrant community for medical image deep learning. And so again, not just software, but it really is about creating that community so that software becomes community supported. When a new publication comes out written by an expert, that expert uses MONAI to implement their method, and then that method becomes available within MONAI. So MONAI is always at the cutting edge. And we've been working towards this. It began as a project between NVidia and King's College London, but now has a large community of supporters out there. It's based on PyTorch, so it builds on existing standards such as DICOM, FHIR, ImageNet, has ways of interfacing with the Imaging Data Commons and TCIA. And so it's easier to learn and very well documented, but it's really optimized for medical imaging. So it understands that CT images are enhanced field units. It provides transforms specific to ultrasound probes. And so it's really optimized for dealing with the medical image data and deep learning within that field. And it prioritizes reproducibility. So Project MONAI, again, has this goal of creating this community. And so MONAI, the software components are listed here. It's not just one big monolithic piece of software, but it has these components to address different challenges within the medical imaging field and reproducibility within them. So there's MONAI Core, which contains the algorithms. There's MONAI Label, which is AI-assisted annotation tool. There's MONAI Deploy, which allows you to integrate your MONAI system into a clinical workflow. And then new is Model Zoo and Federated Learning. And I'm going to go through and touch on each of these in the remainder of today's talk. And also, not given a lot of detail on it here, there's open access to data. With a single line that's called dataset, a function that you call, you're able to download data directly from the MedNIST, so a standard testing and training data set for evaluating neural network architectures, decathlon data sets for segmenting prostates, other challenges, and a variety of different challenging data sets can be quickly imported into your MONAI specified workflow for you to develop and evaluate and compare your system. And then you can also get more recent data from TCIA, IDC, and so forth. And so it gives you that open access data, but I'm going to focus more on these others moving forward. And what you're able to do with this combination of MONAI, you might think of, first thing you think of when you think of deep learning for medical imaging is segmenting livers, segmenting pancreases, and so forth. But really, MONAI is meant to support research within the entire medical imaging workflow. And that workflow begins with image reconstruction. And so there was this wonderful work out of Stanford where they have released a public set of data, as well as an algorithm for processing that data that shows the end-to-end workflow from MRI reconstruction through segmentation of tissues and pathologies within images. And that entire workflow, the different steps within that workflow were all implemented using MONAI. And so end-to-end workflow just in this one publication with publicly released data. In another situation, MONAI is segmentation as you'd expect. So segmenting livers and spleen. And one of the most common ways of doing that is the UNet network architecture. Well, it ends up now there's multiple variations of UNet. And there's also transformer network, contrastive learning, MMUNet, and so forth. And all of those are available within MONAI. So it's not just one way of doing things, but it's multiple different ways that can be compared and contrasted for image segmentation. It's also not just segmentation at one time point, but it can go ahead and use its registration and segmentation to look at longitudinal data. And so it can look at time series data. There's even recurrent neural networks and other systems in there exactly for that. So whether it is live ultrasound data that you're processing intraoperatively or longitudinal study of CT changes over time, all available within MONAI. And it's also clinical diagnosis. It's not just segmenting things within the image, but it's declaring things as benign or malignant, for example. And there's wonderful examples of those out there. And then it's not just benign or malignant, but it's also what are the risks associated with that disease? What is their survival prediction? Multiple publications on that. And then last but not least, MONAI at its heart is a great example of open science. So a lot of the methods that I showed you there, they're actually available within MONAI, even the research methods that were underlying those individual publications. But also you can pull these things together and make new things really easily. They're very modular in their architecture. And one of the best examples of that is shown here. This was out of Paulina Galan's lab at MIT. And what one of her students did was evaluate it. I think it was ultimately 7, I don't recall exactly, 5 to 7 different neural networks, and wanted to see what the performance of these neural networks were going to be for doing a particular segmentation problem. And then the student went ahead and came up with a new approach that merged those 5 different networks, merged all of those results together to produce a result that was better than any one of those individuals, created this hypernet ensemble approach. Now, the neat part about this being open source is the fact that they did own some publicly available data, but even more so, if that student had tried to implement those 5 different techniques on their own, let alone combine them into something new, that would have taken years. But this was a publication that was completed in a matter of months by this student, because they were able to take these modules, combine them together, compare them with one another, use metrics that existed within MONAI, so forth and so on, to really make a paper that would not have been feasible prior to MONAI. And so it's really outstanding how it's supporting open science in that regard. And so it's not just me who thinks it's cool. We've got 600,000 downloads so far, and that number is rapidly increasing. We actually just had the 1.0 release in September of this year. The first release was in April of 2020, I believe it was. And so it's amazingly how fast this thing is going. And so 1.0 just in September, we're already at 600,000 downloads. We have 150 individual contributors from around the world. We have 3,400. If you are a developer, you know what these GitHub stars are. That's where people like your project. Typically, your project gets liked maybe 30 times if you're lucky. Well, we're at 1,000 times, 100 times that. We're at 3,400 plus GitHub stars. Also, the number of projects on GitHub that have imported MONAI and then modified it or extended in some way, right now that count is over 480. And if you do a Google search or a Google Scholar search in particular on MONAI requiring that plus medical deep learning, you end up with 600 plus publications that are citing it. And when I scan through them, they really are legit MONAI publications. And so it was really an impressive impact that we've had. Again, 1.0 is just coming out. You're some of the first to hear about it. And this is because we're really standing on the shoulders of giants. We had some wonderful early adopters of this toolkit, and some of them are listed here, including Duke. I actually have collaborations with a trauma surgeon at Duke, Dr. Sean Montgomery, and he and I have been using MONAI in our projects for the past year. And so it's really a lot of people are early adopters, users, testers, and contributors of this. And then also MONAI, you could say, was smart in the very beginning, in that King's College London and NVidia really realized that the best way for their toolkit to get adopted was not to force it on people, but to invite people to participate in it. And they did a great job of engaging with the community, getting feedback from the community, involving developers from around the world, as well as people conducting research within the field to contribute to it. And so they formed this advisory board and multiple working groups in order to all come together. And it's amazing how active, really one of the most successful collaborations that I've ever been a part of. And the end result is shown here. All right, so there's, again, these components where at the center we see MONAI core that has all the algorithms within it. On the right side, we have MONAI deploy, which is the tool and approaches in order to get into clinical use. Prior to that, though, we have MONAI label, which is used to annotate images, so simplify, speed up that annotation process. And then MONAI model zoo, which is a collection of pre-trained models. And what I'm going to talk about today in a little bit more detail are these 5 things that are listed here. So the core, deploy, and label components, as well as the very new MONAI zoo and federated learning approaches. So what is MONAI label? As I mentioned, it's AI-assisted annotation. All right, what is AI-assisted annotation? Well, the premise is annotation is no fun, right? And so it's a simple assumption to make. And so, and also what they see more and more is that the quality of annotation, more than the network architecture and tweaking it and so forth, the quality of the annotations really drive your final performance. One mistake there can just have lasting effect no matter what network you use. And so to assist in this, MONAI label was created. And what that does is it simplifies the annotation process by integrating it into the learning strategy, into the learning and training of that neural network. And they went ahead and took MONAI label, this algorithms for doing this online active learning, and they integrated into existing tools that people already use for annotating data. And so 3D Slicer, OHIF for radiological images, and the Digital Slide Archive, QPath, and others for pathology images. And so MONAI supports both those. And so operating within those viewers, you annotate your first data set and maybe your second and third data set. And then it automatically takes those first three annotations that you've done, and then it begins training a neural network model based on just those three examples. And then when that fourth example pops up, it's not going to be a great segmentation probably, but it'll be an okay segmentation. It'll start to be a little bit better, all right? And so you're editing, you're erasing the bad parts, adding in the good parts. And then the fifth one comes along, sixth one, so forth. Each time you're retraining that neural network in between. And additionally, the data that you're annotating is not just a random data set, but it's the data set that the neural network thinks is going to provide it with the most information. So you're not going to annotate a bunch of data sets that look similar to one another, but each of them has really been analyzed by the neural network, by this MONAI label framework. They look through all your data and pick those cases and present them in an order that is most effective for its learning. And so what you end up with is, ideally, we're targeting a 75% reduction in the amount of annotation that you have to do. And in the end, you have a trained neural network. When you finish that last annotated data set, your neural network is trained. And so this coupling, it's a really powerful tool. And it's the user interface is existing, really nice, elegant 3D, 2D graphical user interfaces with wonderful segmentation tools in it. So this can be used by anyone, is really what was intended. And then once you've got your trained model, and whether you train that model using MONAI label or you're down writing your own Python script in order to do your own training system in the core, using the core of MONAI, once you've got that trained system that's shown here, we provide an interface, a development toolkit that allows you to wrap it around and specify what kind of data it'll work on. For example, this neural network is expected to work on CT data. And that CT data is supposed to have at least, or at most a 3 millimeter inner slice spacing. All these different requirements exist. Quality assurances have to be made. But once you've specified those and wrapped them around your neural network, you can go ahead and plug it into the MONAI deploy system. And what the MONAI deploy system is, it runs your inference engine. Inference is, running that AI model after communicating with your PACs. So from your PACs, you can go ahead and push your data set to a DICOM receiver. All right, and this DICOM receiver can also get information from FHIR and from other systems, clinical systems that are out there. And then it goes ahead, and once it's received all the data it needs, it launches your AI model that then sends that information back to your PACs, your segmentation report, so a DICOM structured report or an electronic health record annotation and so forth. This system is the MONAI deploy system. It really simplifies for a researcher how to get clinicians to use their AI model and help them evaluate their AI model. And so this really saves a lot of legwork, uncertainty, risk, incorporation of multiple other packages. This used to be a very complex process that we've really tried to streamline. And from a hospital point of view, what you're looking at is a shared AI infrastructure, all right? This inference engine can be swapped out for different AI techniques. And so it's a shared AI infrastructure that once established and security confirmed by IT departments and so forth, it can be used for a variety of different clinical applications. And we've already gone ahead via connectathons, AHE connectathons, and so forth. We've already demonstrated that it interoperates with a large number of PACs and EHR systems, and we're going to keep up that effort. And so it adheres to these existing hospital standards. It works with these hospital devices. Again, this addresses a lot of concerns of the hospital system. And so MONAI deploy does the annotation. We got then the MONAI core doing the trained model, and then you can go ahead and deploy it. So it's this end-to-end workflow for AI that MONAI provides. And what is MONAI core that I've been talking about? Well, it's really built for customization and reproducibility. It's got a massive number of really detailed algorithms that exist for transforming your data, specifying different kind of neural network layers, loss functions, and so forth. On top of that, then it made it a little bit easier to combine these things together in different training engines and testing engines. And then on top of that, we've got example Jupyter notebooks that show how to tie all of these things together in order to solve particular problems using high-level technologies such as federated learning. And then we go ahead and have data ingestion techniques and so forth so that you can embed it within workflows. And so MONAI Core is all of these IO methods, high-level scripts, as well as low-level implementation of algorithms. And it's constantly being expanded. 1.0 really saw some really exciting new algorithms implemented in it. And so when I say MONAI Core, how hard is it to use? All right, well, again, reproducibility has two different branches to it. One branch is it needs to be repeatable. The other branch is it needs to be easy. All right, it needs to be, in order for something to be reproducible, there can't be too many bells and whistles. There can't be too many switches. And all of those capabilities that I showed just on the previous slide, we've really tried to reduce them to a elegant user interface and for the programmers in Python. All right. And so Python, the standard way of installing software is the way that you install MONAI. You just do a pip install of MONAI. And then within Python, you can issue the command to import MONAI to tell Python you're going to start using it, and then ask it to print out its configuration. And what you see is that MONAI, when you've installed MONAI, it actually goes ahead and installs a large number of dependent packages that it's dependent on. And here it's printing out the exact version of all of those different informations. When you run and train your neural network model, it's keeping track of the versions of the different software components that were used in training that model. This is the first step in reproducibility. You need to know what was the computer environment in which this training occurred. And so MONAI has that day one. And then one of the most popular networks, as I mentioned, was the UNet network. And again, if you want to sit down and code this, if you're not going to use label in order to do your hand annotations, but you want to specify your own network that you're going to train up on some pre-existing data, one of the common things that you use is this UNet architecture. UNet in PyTorch is 50, 100 lines of code. You're going to make a mistake, all right? There's going to be an error. And so, yeah, you can download UNet architectures written by other people, but how tested are they? Do they already have their own errors within them? And how well maintained are they? If they upgrade the version of Python that they're using, will they still run? Well, we take care of all that for you, and we reduce the UNet network down to a single function call. This could be one long line of code if you wanted. And so in this single function call, you are specifying the major parameters that are associated with the UNet network architecture. This one's going to work on two-dimensional images. There's one channel is in, so it's a gray level image as output. As input, the output is a single channel as well. So you're identifying the presence of a class or the probability of a class. And then UNet has this complex U-shaped architecture where you do subsampling on every level. And imagine having to program all of these different steps, all of these different kinds of network layers in your system. Again, it's harder than it seems. Here, you can just specify, it automatically knows all of these different sublayers and how to piece them together. But what it doesn't know is the size of the layers that you want to use. How large of a network do you want to create? And specifying these two parameters, the channels and the strides, allows you to have a lot of variety of different complexity of UNet architectures. And we had the same kind of function calls associated with different transformer networks, DenseNet, RegNet, and Auto3DNet, and UNet, and so forth, variety of different networks out there. So again, single line of code, this is where reproducibility pays off, because a single line of code replaces 100 lines of code, and it's easy to do. And then the next thing, now that you've specified your UNet in your Python script, you want to go ahead and access some medical data. Well, normally this is the other major aspect of reproducibility. As I stated, you mislabel one data set and your results can vary significantly. Same thing is, if you use a different collection of data than someone else, you really can't compare the accuracy of your neural networks. It's not totally fair because really you're comparing the completeness of that data set and representing the problem. And so it is, what you want to do is, when evaluating different neural network architectures, is maintain consistent data sets. Well, how do you do that across institutes or for an entire community? Well, you make it easy to identify and download a data set, and then get the training components of that data set, the testing components, and the validation components. That split, that separation of the data so that you never test on your training data, but you train on some and then you test on a completely different set. That's all handled automatically, again, with this one data set command that I had talked about. And so here in the data set, we're using a special version of the data set, which allows us to download the decathlon data, which perhaps not surprisingly has 10 different problems within it that can be solved by neural networks. And we're going to solve problem number 5 or task number 5, which is prostate segmentation. And we're asking it to go ahead and download the training data. And what it does is it goes out, goes to, I believe it's Google Cloud that we're now using, goes to a Google Cloud site, downloads it from there for free for you onto your local computer. And then when it downloads it, it goes ahead and makes certain via this MD5 checksum that the data wasn't corrupted when it was downloaded. So you get the actual data. And so anyone issuing this command on any computer will get the same collection of data for training their system. So it's really quite powerful in that regard. And then the next thing that it does is it allows you to, as you download the data, you can go ahead and after you've downloaded it, you can transform that data. You can manipulate that data. Because in deep learning systems, it's always about how much data you have, well-annotated data you have. And so you want to go ahead and, if it's an ultrasound image, you can flip it right to left a lot of time, depending upon the data that you have. Or if it's an MRI, you can slightly brighten or slightly dim it. If it's a nuclear medicine image, you can go ahead and add noise to it. You know, those sorts of manipulations allow you to simulate a larger data set available. And MONAI allows you to go ahead and do these manipulations to simulate a larger data set or to standardize your data set. And they can be random manipulations that are occurring so that it really does simulate a much randomly larger, arbitrarily large data set for training your neural network. And so this is a really powerful technique that you just go ahead and specify that you want to scale the intensity, you want to rotate, you want to flip, you want to zoom, all by amounts that are randomly chosen. And so this randomization, though, you think, that's counterintuitive to reproducibility. The cool part is you can call this command in MONAI called set determinism, and you specify a seed. And MONAI makes it so that anytime that you run this command on that same data, the presentation, the collection of training data, even though it's been randomly enlarged, will undergo the same random enlargement on any computer. So it's deterministic in its training as much as possible. And so what we specify when we download this data set, instead of transform now, we're going to go ahead and specify the transforms that should be used in. And so you can train a neural network in about 10 lines of code in using MONAI. And so it really is a compact, powerful, reproducible system that you have. You have to import the appropriate components of MONAI. You specify the transforms. In this case, I'm just scaling the intensity. Here I'm using the MEDNIS data set, so National Institute of Standard Medical Standard Testing data set. I'm getting the training data from it. And I'm calling a supervised trainer, this time using, instead of a UNet, I'm using a dense net and specifying its size. Atom optimizer, cross entropy loss function. These are all, again, this is, you don't have to do this if you use MONAI label, but if you want to get down in the weeds, you really, really can. And here we've specified the architecture of the system and how training should occur and what function should be maximized as we do that training. And then we just call trainer run. And the end result will be a trainer neural network. Trainer will represent a neural network that's trained on this data. So it's really powerful what it can do. And with MONAI 1.0, it can do even more, all right? So again, we do radiology, pathology, and endoscopy images are all supported, and really a multitude of other images are supported. And two of the cool new things that we added to MONAI with 1.0 are the model zoo and the federated learning. So these are the last two topics to talk about today. And so what we've talked about so far is really when working on your own, and labeling your own data set and using MONAI label or writing your own Python code, building on top of MONAI and so forth. But what Model Zoo and federated learning move towards is really making you a participant in the community. And so we're really excited about these extensions to MONAI. Now, Model Zoo, and the zoo it's just a common term within the AI field. You might have even heard of Hugging Face, which is another collection of pre-trained AI models that are out there that's been in the news quite a bit. They did essentially an IPO and got an amazing amount of funding. What the Model Zoo is for MONAI is the same thing. It is a collection of MONAI models that have already been trained or MONAI architectures, which have already been defined that aren't available within the base thing, within the base neural network. And so some of these are indicated here. So there's the Bratz MRI segmentation. Well, Bratz has been for 7 to 10 years, been a longstanding brain tumor segmentation challenge that's been repeated at this annual conference for years and years. Well, here, someone has gone ahead and trained a neural network to download, train, and test on the Bratz data that was used in 2018 MICI. And so you can get a neural network that performs well on this Bratz 2018 MRI data. Or there's lung nodule CT detection, there's pathology tumor detection, there's segmenting pancreases from CT scans, segmenting spleens, on and on and on, transformer networks and so forth. And so it's really an amazing collection of models that we just released this initially. There's 15 models at this time, and you know, the number is growing weekly. And these models come from King's College London, NVidia, Charité in Berlin, all of these different institutes that are leaders in deep learning. And what you can do is you can take one of these models and you can use it to start your labeling process. So if you want to do pancreatic segmentation, you can go ahead and download their pancreas segmenter. And if it's not performing as well as you would like on your data because your resolution is different or your CT scanner is different or so forth, you can go ahead, at least start with their model and then continue to refine it by using the MONAI label process. And so it's a great way of jump-starting your annotation, so you have a whole lot less to annotate. Or if you want to develop something using MONAI Core, instead of training a neural network from scratch, you can use these as pre-trained neural networks that you do transfer learning on. Or if you want to deploy, you can just go ahead and take one of these neural networks. There's one for lung segmentation, and say you want to first segment the lungs and then identify tumors in it. You can sequence these together, the pre-trained ones with your new ones, in order to deploy an entirely new AI system. And so I know I'm covering a lot here and throwing a lot at you, but it really is powerful. And we're really excited with this 1.0 release that this community has come together to create in a really short time. And the final thing that we released in this, with this 1.0 release, is federated learning. And this is really where I think the community can shine. Here, the notion is that you have a problem that you want to solve, but Duke and UNC are actually collaborating to solve the problem, let's say, all right? And so Duke Radiology and UNC Radiology both have wonderful CT scans of pancreases, and they want to go ahead and train a neural network that's better than any other neural network that's out there. And so Duke says, okay, UNC, give us all your data. And UNC is like, no, you give us all your data. And that sharing of data is always a challenge. What federated learning allows is you can take your model and give it to UNC, and they run and train their data on it a bit. And then they send it back to you, and then you give it to Duke. And then Duke goes ahead and trains on it for a bit, and then comes back to you, and you send it off to radiology. There's various round robin and sequencing schemes in which you can train a single model on data sets at 2 different locations without ever sharing those data sets. And the model constantly improves. And this is an area of research, as well as just massive potential for impacting the field, to avoid patient, sharing patient identifying information and so forth. And this is now available within MONAI in support of NVidia federated learning and a variety of other federated learning libraries that are out there. So just as MONAI label was integrated with Slicer and pathology image viewers and so forth, you can take MONAI federated learning and embed it within these toolkits that already exist for federated learning that are out there to really improve them and get AI running. So what we've seen is MONAI addresses the end-to-end workflow for deep learning for AI. It's got some great community support now as well in the forms of federated learning, model zoo, and you can build upon, stand on the shoulders of giants in order to make all of this help your lab advance AI within your lab in a reproducible way. So if Bob leads, you'll be okay. And to learn more, huge amount of documentation that's out there. There's free courses. Someone has already started up paid courses that you have to pay for in order to attend. We took that as the highest compliment ever. And so people are actually willing to pay for training, but you don't need it. Don't tell them I said that. But because there's a variety of training that's already out there that's really well done, and it's listed here. But if you go to that first website, that monai.io website, it's all branched off from there, and we try to make it easy to find. So thank you very much for this time. Clearly, I'm passionate about this topic, and now I welcome any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. This is really great. So yeah, first of all, I wanted to encourage everybody to ask questions. We have a couple. So please just type them in the question and answer under the question and answer icon on your Zoom, and I will read as many of those as I can. So feel free to do that now. We have 3 of them. But yeah, first, I wanted to reinforce something that you said, which was really great. That I think that in the academic community, traditionally, there was a little bit of a caution when it comes to open science, making your code publicly available and making your data publicly available. And I fully agree with you, and I'm very happy to see that. I think that the academic evaluation criteria are adapting a little bit to reward that kind of contributions. And also, I think that the way that people interact with those resources are fitting in those academic evaluation criteria. So I'm really happy to see that, because beyond the academic evaluation criteria, this is really important. This is really how you can make impact, right? And so we want academia to reward what makes impact, and I'm happy to see that it's slowly converging. Yeah,
I think you phrased it perfectly. Slowly converging. I think it's kind of a little logarithmic scale. I think we're getting our exponential. I think we're getting faster and faster now. But it's been a slow process. But I think the benefits that people now, the tangible benefits that people see that come from sharing data and so forth in terms of citation as well as impact, it's phenomenal. And COVID really brought that home. You know, the amount of data sharing that was occurring internationally, all the repositories that were popping up with COVID CT and X-ray scans that citizen scientists could take advantage of. It really was phenomenal, and one of the good things to come out of the past couple of years. So.
Yeah, we have shared a couple data sets in the last couple of years, and it's really, yeah, beyond maybe hopefully, you know, increasing citations. It's really nice to hear how people appreciate it, and they say this really allowed me to do this.
Well, and one thing, I work with MONAI, one of our main societies in medical imaging, and the board just approved now reviewers, when they look at a paper in a publication, first off, when you submit it, you have to say where your data came from, all right? And then you have to indicate how it was cited in the paper. So, and then reviewers are tasked with identifying whether or not they use public data set and cited it appropriately. And so I think we're going to see this full loop now coming around, where people are going to be encouraged to share their data, people are going to be using it, and then the people who share the data finally get, you know, what's due to them, the citations that they deserve. Citations is, again, just one thing, as you stated, but we're really trying to close that whole loop so that the potential is realized.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, I do have a question, but let me actually read some questions from our audience, and I'll ask mine if there's still time for it. So the first one is, does MONAI label support bony landmark labeling? For example, center of acetabulum. Or does it only work for regions, liver or spleen segmentation? That's an example.
Yeah, and it does work for landmarks. And so the landmarks are, you know, done as microregions. And it really depends on the neural network that you're going for training, because a lot of those, someone later on mentions YOLO and so forth, a lot of those actually are, even though it's a landmark, it's really a bounding box or a region around. But yes, MONAI label does now support the annotations that are landmarks, and as these, you know, small regions and so forth. And so, excellent.
Okay. Another question starts with great talk. I fully share the sentiment of the importance of open science in increasing impact. However, one metric for impact is technology transfer. A patent in the medical field to justify the involvement for technology transfer. Would you share your insight on how to maximize both scientific impact and industrial impact?
Sure. So two different things. There's definitely a place for patent, but the question is a wonderful phrasing because it shows a little bit of the conflict that exists. All right. When you talk technology transfer, I would argue there's no better way than open source. If you want your technology to get out there, have impact, be used, making it open source freely available so that anyone can take it and run with it, that's going to do it. All right. Now, if you're out to make money and you want to run a business, okay, then by all means, if you want to invest that effort in order to file a patent, hold off your publications while you're filing that patent, and then go ahead and try to license that patent out to someone or develop it yourself, by all means, go for it. What I think you will see over and over again is the likelihood of that succeeding and realizing those returns. I've got 4 patents. I licensed them to medical companies, and I did a startup and everything like that. Kitware. I'm here talking about open source for a reason. Don't repeat my failings. I mean, they do have a place, but they're much higher risk and much lower return the vast majority of times. And so, but if it's where your passion lies, by all means, go for it. But if you really want to do that technology transfer, if you really want to see things get out there and get used, I loved it when ITK came out, Insight Toolkit, one of our tools that we had. Within a year, there were job postings at Siemens, GE, and other places where they say ITK experience desired. All right. So they would never tell us that they were using ITK, but we knew it. So that was the impact that we were having there. MONAI, NVidia has invested a huge product line. Their whole Clara product line has now pivoted to using MONAI. So we now have NVIDIA, they have fully invested. They have multiple developers contributing to this because they have commercial systems. They're selling GPUs specifically for running MONAI. I mean, that's phenomenal, all right? And that's the impact that we want to have. And so, realize, be true to yourself. If you really want to have that impact that's out there, open source. If you want to if you enjoy doing a small business and you want to see something through to the end and FDA approval, you want to help that with that one patient in particular, or grow something yourself that you're much nearer the end user, go for the patent in the small business or large.
So I'll follow up to this question. So this is MONAI, right, is a tool for various things, but largely for developing things, right? It's not the final model that you use now for liver segmentation or thyroid nodule classification. So do you see a space for, or how would you imagine that impact, that technology transfer in those specific clinical applications in a form of open source? Or do you think that that's possible?
So I guess I see 2 components to your question. One is, can you make open source into a commercial product? Is that?
I guess one way a different way to phrase this is, doesn't it have to be a commercial product to make that final impact as a specific clinical tool?
No question at all. But I remember sitting on NIH study section, so cycling back to patents, and in the study section, they were reviewing small business SBIR, small business and initiated research, and so they're still an R mechanism, still supposed to be research. And I remember with a straight face, one of the reviewers said, "Well, they got a patent, so it must be a great idea." And it's like, a patent is not a technology review, all right? And so anyone can get a patent, all right? And so this notion that a patent is a gold ring, I don't subscribe to it. Now, and then the notion that you have to patent an idea in order to make a product out of it, I also totally don't subscribe to it. I was on, we attempted to come up with a computer-aided diagnosis toolkit a number of years ago, and Susan Wood, who was vice president of R2 Technologies at the time, which was one of the only FDA-approved computer-aided diagnosis systems out there. She sat on the advisory board of the software that I was developing. And someone asked her, aren't you nervous that we're going to make this open source CAD system and we're going to put you out of business? And she's like, there are no way that academics or open source tools will ever usurp our commercial product. And she's right. She's like, the user interface, the integration with the clinical environments and so forth. So, you know, we talk about MONAI deploy, and MONAI deploy will get you, let's say 80% of the way there. But that other 20% of the way that you have to do in order to make it a commercial product in terms of documentation, FDA testing, and really able to handle every DICOM format that's out there, or specify the DICOM formats that you wanted to support, you know, so forth and so on, and work with leaders in the field, do the training and testing and validation of multi-center clinical trials. That often takes either a lot of NIH funding and great dedication, but more often than not, it takes a commercial product to see it over that finish line. And so there's a clear use for a commercial product. You have to become a commercial product, I think, to go to that multi-center dissemination. However, it doesn't require a patent, and it really can be done with open source software for 90% of it. So.
Okay.
Elon Musk just had that quote, you know, I'm not going to really quote him correctly. I didn't hear it myself. It's a little hearsay, but that someone asked him about patents, and he's like, you know, patents are for the weak, right? And so he's like, you have to move faster than your competitors, but trying to block them using a patent is no way to make a product. And so open source is going to help you move faster than your competitors, I strongly believe.
Yeah, it's certainly an evolving, I think, landscape, right, on how to do this. There are definitely patents are still present, right, in that landscape, but it's a question whether it is the right way, and of course there are questions on can you patent an algorithm, right, and how to do that. So I think that this will be evolving, but I think you're right. I think that open source will play a more significant role there at whichever stage of that, right, of that path to clinical implementation. Yeah. Okay, we have another question. Will MONAI consider non-technical background researchers to use it? How to address data privacy?
Sure. MONAI Label was really, now setting up MONAI Label and installing 3D Slicer on your computer and a server and so forth, we're trying to make that easier and easier. The 3D Slicer folk, it's a different open source effort. 3D Slicer itself is a little bit like Adobe Photoshop. It has an awful lot of bells and whistles, and so it's not always for the faint of heart. OHIF is another open source system out there that's a little bit easier to use, but a little bit harder to install. We're working on it. And so we've definitely, you don't have to be a programmer anymore. You don't have to be, you know, an exceptional technical developer by any means, but it does take computer skills. You have to have quite a bit of comfort with computers. And, but MONAI Label, this notion of just annotating your data and having that result in a trained model at the end of the annotation. So you don't have to do any programming along the way, that no code solution, that's really what we're shooting for. We've made good progress, but there's always more to be done. But we think we've really lowered the bar. There's videos out there that you can look up for MONAI Label and look at MONAI Label with 3D Slicer, how to get started and the results that people get. And I'm surprised with how effective it is.
Great, thank you. So next question is if MONAI will be keeping maintained, which means to keep pace of adding models and algorithms.
Yeah, this is one of the strengths of it. So and it's the same with ITK. So ITK actually had Kitware come along, and we adopted ITK as the foundation for a lot of our work. And as a result, we were vested in maintaining ITK, and we continue to do that VTK, same thing. VTK has been around since 1996 and maintains cutting edge. We just added new cinematic rendering to it and so forth. And ITK is now 60% of ITK has been written by people other than Kitware folk. All right. And so it's amazing how these toolkits can take off. And the strength of MONAI is NVidia. So a lot of people think, you know, oh, commercial, that's evil, right? They might make it closed source, something along those lines. But no, they're dedicating developers to it. They've got products based on it. They're committed to the long-term success of MONAI, as well as the community that is around it. And so I'm very comfortable to say that MONAI is here to stay for quite some time, for years, if not decades. And so I think all open source is not equal. You need to look at the community behind it, the number of developers contributing to it and so forth. But when you see numbers like 150 developers contributing to it, 600,000 downloads, 3,400 stars and so forth, those statistics should be very reassuring that it's here for quite some time.
Okay. So maybe the last question that we have time for. If I'm working on a collaborative group, a few annotators, how can we work on the same data set? Can I deploy MONAI on AWS, for example, for this group? Thanks.
Yeah, actually, AWS is one of our strong partners, as well as Google Colab. And so with AWS, they have the SageMaker platform, which is for running AI, essentially Jupyter notebooks, but AI systems in the cloud on AWS services. And so you can do exactly that. So SageMaker, they're announcing the full release of this with demo within the next couple of weeks, you know, prior to RSNA. And actually, if you go to the MONAI website, and go to some of the tutorials, and there'll be what's called Jupyter notebooks. These are the scripting tools that are used by AI people to program their deep learning system. So how to program MONAI core. If you click on them, it actually launches them immediately in Google Colab. And so that Jupyter notebook that you're seeing and running it actually exists in Google Cloud. And if you make edits to it, those edits can be shared with anyone, just like you share a Google Doc. And they can be viewed simultaneously and all that kind of thing. I believe they can be viewed simultaneously. But you can definitely work on them in sequence, just like a Google Doc. And so that's one way of doing it. Now, the other thing that we're hoping for is to combine federated learning with MONAI label. Wouldn't it be great if you could take that central data set and then send it to multiple people at different institutes? Well, not send the data set, but have MONAI label running within 3D Slicer. So this relatively easy to install system at these multiple institutes. And then as different experts annotate the data, the same model back at that central place is being updated and learning. And then they get new data sets to annotate back and forth between the two. And so it really is this community developed annotation and trained model in the end of it. So that's another way that we hope to develop this shared training of neural networks and shared development of solutions, but we're not quite there yet.
All right, so we're coming to the end of our time, so maybe we'll stop here. Thank you very much, Stephen. This is a great presentation, a great initiative. As I mentioned earlier to you, we are already starting to use MONAI in my lab. We are planning to use it more. I think this presentation will help. I know that some of my students are actually here, so I think it will be helpful. Thank you everybody for listening. Thank you AI Health. We're working with AI Health to organize this seminar. Check out also Duke Spark. So Duke Spark is in this new initiative at Duke, where we collaborate technical folks and clinicians on various problems in medical imaging AI. So if you're a Duke, let us know if you'd like to collaborate. If you're outside, let us know if you'd like to collaborate, and also tune in. We'll do this seminar once a month on the first Tuesday of the month at noon. So please join us for the next one. And thank you, everybody.